and salutations to our fine podcast audience. Welcome to 3 Ps in a Pod, episode 255.
We made it.
255.
Mm-hmm. That's a lot.
It just hit me as I said that number.
It's a lot of
I've been doing this a long time.
Well, yeah.
Ed's laughing. Okay.
I was.
You don't got nothing to say about it.
I don't have anything to say.
Okay. It just hit me that's a lot of episodes.
255. It
It's
is a lot.
of episodes.
That's
So,
almost 5 years, isn't it? Has it been 5 years?
Well, we started before COVID.
Oh,
think
you're right.
I think of all numbers in terms of baseball, and I think, well, that's a good number of home runs, but it's not like remarkable.
Why would this podcast be equal to home runs?
I don't know.
That's what I was going to
He
say.
ain't hit a home run in a long
I
time.
know.
man.
gonna say.
All numbers to me made me think of some baseball stats. I know baseball stats that I shouldn't know,
Of course.
and I'm just thinking, well, it's a fair amount, but ain't nobody going to Hall of Fame because they hit 255 home runs.
I just think about it in week because we do it every week. And it's
That's
just
right.
like,
We
that's a
do.
lot of weeks, man.
It
It
is.
is.
A lot of weeks. And some folks are still listening because they're still sending us questions.
Yep.
So,
That is
or
true.
they just joined the party late.
By the
And
way, speaking of baseball, we're almost at spring
we're
training.
close, man.
We're
we are
so
in
close.
the month of spring training.
Yeah, it's almost going to be here. Probably, I guess this drops right around the week of spring training, or is it dropping this week?
drops tomorrow.
Oh well, no. All right, you know what that
It's
says?
coming.
We're behind.
behind.
Right up on it.
Keep sending us questions.
Yeah,
and we'll get
'cause
to
we're
it.
We've only got
on,
2.
right on top of it.
Right. So here we go. This is a question about the Old Testament.
Oh, good.
Oh, yeah. We love the Old Testament.
Nobody has any questions about the
No.
Old Testament. Scholars, they solved all of them.
Yeah. We have the answer.
So we get to solve it right here. Now, I want to say, whoever sent us this question is obvious. I feel like, I could be wrong, but I feel like maybe this is a person who started one of those reading the Bible in a
Yeah.
year kind of
Yeah.
things because they're getting to Exodus right here at the end of the month.
That's probably about right.
So good for you for not giving up
That's
through
true.
the genealogies. That's all I've got to say.
Good for you.
Good for you. If that's what
Maybe in
you're doing.
retirement, I'll start a read the Bible thing. We'll start in the New Testament because that's where you ought to start.
Mm-hmm.
And then because most people aren't going to make it very long anyway,
Mm.
the really committed will get to read
The Old
Malachi.
Testament. There you go.
Yeah, they'll be the ones to get to read Malachi. And
That's
that, but
right.
you got to be really committed,
Yes.
and
I have seen some Bible reading plans
that do both.
that kind of blend the thing. I think that's a little better.
It is.
Oh,
better.
it's much better.
It's a little better.
And it helps you make more sense. And maybe we can do that with some of this.
Mhm.
It helps you make sense of what the Old Testament is setting up about Jesus
Mhm.
when I'm reading things that are happening in the life of Jesus too. Because
Yeah.
most of the life of Jesus makes more sense in light of the Old Testament, and most of the Old Testament makes more sense in light of Jesus.
See, I think if you were to do something like that, this is just me. I'm just making this up. But what I would do is I would have people read the life of Jesus, and as we get towards all the stuff that got mentioned in the Old Testament,
Mhm.
we'd be reading the crucifixion while we're reading Isaiah 53.
Sure.
Or even
Or the Psalms that
Mhm.
talk about that and show, because that's when stuff starts coming alive. Man.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That would
That's
be
right.
cool.
I think you have to be, again, anybody that's starting down, I don't know where, we don't have any way of knowing who all's watching this and why you're watching it and all that. If you're just starting to investigate faith, you need to just focus on Jesus.
Yes.
Read Jesus. Christianity is a
Mhm.
faith that follows Jesus. And, the two were not necessarily tied together for a long time because they weren't, it wasn't easily accessible to do that.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying it doesn't make sense. It does make
It
sense.
does.
But you have to be pretty committed and understand the story to even get the connection. Just reading it, if I just hand you the 2
Mhm.
stories,
Mhm.
you're not going to get the connection.
Mm.
No, but I would argue that for any part of reading the Bible.
Oh, yeah.
I would say if you're new to faith, go to church.
Well, that's true. Too.
That's what I would say.
Wow.
Don't just pick up the life of Jesus either, because I
Now
don't know
that's-
that what you will come to about the life of Jesus will be what historically
Now,
Christians
Nathan,
have-
Nathan, that's a hot take. We'll probably have to explore sometime.
what, to go to church.
Yeah, if you're new to faith, just go to church.
Just go to
If
church.
you're trying to figure it out, you probably ought to have some people help you.
Reading it
Agreed.
in community is really important,
Okay.
and to understand how, I think about, there's a really good book out there. I think all 3 of us have read it. I know you were the one who gave it to me years ago. the King Jesus Gospel
Oh, yeah.
by Scott McKnight. And
Good
his
one.
whole point is Jesus is the Messiah of Israel and the Savior of the world. And it's all wound up
It is.
together.
Mhm.
And figuring it all out
Mm.
together in a community that's trying to live it out with Jesus at the center is ultimately the thing. I mean, the scriptures were given to the church,
Yeah.
not that the scriptures didn't make the church.
Mm.
The scriptures are a gift to the church. They are not a gift to Barnes and Noble, and that anyone should
Yeah,
just go pick up and go
I
figure out.
I
on
was
their
saying
own.
while you were talking about that, we might be better off if we understood it's a handed down faith instead of a
Yeah,
how to faith. It's not a
right.
you can
Biblical thing.
yeah it's well yeah for sure. It's not necessarily yes that's right. It's a handed down faith.
That's right.
Well, and
It's
in the
handy.
same way that a lot of things are, because I've said that to people, have had people come to me and we'll talk about something. Well, what about this in Islam, or what about this in Buddhism? I've said, now I've read sections of the Quran, and I've read some of these other things. I am by no means an expert on any of these things, because I think they would, in a similar way that I see, because now on TikTok,
Mhm.
I got on some point the algorithm gave me all the apologetic stuff where people are on college campuses debating
Yeah.
other people. In the same way that I'll watch Muslims on college campuses debating the Bible with believers, and I'm going, but the interpretation you have come up with is no historically orthodox
No.
Christian. So whatever I say about what their text plainly says to me is also probably not a historically orthodox Muslim belief system either, just because I read it in their book.
That's
There,
right.
there is a communities of faith interpret them together, and there is this long line of us going, hey, this seems to be lining up with people who have faithfully followed Jesus, what people throughout history have thought about these ideas.
So with all of that as context,
Yes.
Somebody wants to know about a
we're
question
gonna,
in the
we're,
Old Testament.
we're going to bring a community aspect to understanding this question that comes from the book of Exodus. So here we go.
Book number 2.
That's right. The second book in your Old Testament. So here's the question written to us. In the book of Exodus, how was it possible that the magicians were able to perform the same acts as Moses, like turning a staff into a snake or water into blood? Moses was given those signs to show that he was sent from God. I don't understand how they did it and why God would select things that the magicians could also do. All right, that's the question. First, we need to set up the context for those who are going, what?
Yeah.
So set some context for us.
You
So-
should watch the Hanna-Barbera
No.
Ooh,
Don't do any of
Exodus.
that. No.
I'll just say this, top notch.
Really?
No. No.
like,
Let's
yes.
just stop all of that. I'm sure that's available on YouTube very near
I don't
this.
know. I don't know if you can find those anymore. We had them on VHS when I was a kid. I watched the heck
yeah.
out of those VHS.
So Exodus in and of itself gives you a clue if you just think, what does Exodus mean?
Yeah.
So it
Mm.
means to leave,
Yes,
which means you're somewhere you want to get out of.
that's right.
Mhm.
And so it goes back to the end of Genesis,
Mhm.
where the nation that God promised Abraham
Mhm.
has begun to give birth in one of his great grandsons, Joseph, and
Yeah, great grandson.
great grandsons. That's the end of the Genesis, and now there are thousands of them in Egypt. Joseph had been blessed there. He was a friend of the Pharaohs. He had been almost at the level of Pharaoh himself.
So the Jews and the Egyptians are coexisting
Pretty
well.
well.
at that time.
He sort of saved Egypt
Mhm.
at the
Yeah, he
time.
did.
Mhm.
But, and I don't remember if it's the first Exodus or end of Genesis where it says, but then Pharaoh that did
That's
not.
the first verse of
First
Exodus.
That's
part of
what I thought.
Exodus, yeah.
First verse of Exodus is a Pharaoh king that didn't remember Joseph.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Didn't think anything about that.
Mm-mm.
And he put all of the Hebrews into slavery. And they are crying out like everybody else that's been done wrong unjustly. Every other people that have been under the foot of somebody, they're crying out to God.
And
That-
we need to make clear, it's 400 years.
400 years.
400 years.
400 years they cry out to God, Lord, deliver us from this.
Mhm.
Take us out. And Exodus is the story of them coming out. A deliverer is found, a guy named Moses, who was raised in the house
Of the Pharaoh.
of the
Mhm.
Pharaoh. That's a whole other story. I don't want to get into the whole thing of how that's drawn out. He then comes back. He doesn't want to do it, but he goes back to Egypt to bring the people out. And God tells him, when he first calls him, I'm going to give you a staff. It'll be a sign to the people. And one of them is I'm going to throw it down. It'll become a snake.
Yes.
That's one of them. So that's one of the things there. Water, blood, all that comes later along with some other kind of things. So is that enough context, or we need to do more?
I think it's
so.
enough for the
I think
story.
the question really, the heart of your question you want to know is, okay, these signs that God gave to Moses, which you obviously are taking to be what it says. God gave him this supernatural ability to do these signs to prove that God was with him. And so in the story, Moses goes and does these things. Like, for instance, he throws the staff down, it becomes a snake. And then it says in the text that the magicians in Egypt did the exact same thing.
That's right.
Okay. And then it also says that when Moses turns the water into blood, that the magicians come around and they do the exact same thing. So it's kind of like it's a competition between God and the gods of Egypt, you know. And I guess what this person is saying, well, is it true that they actually had supernatural power, or was it some kind of sleight of hand? And why is it being equated to what God can do? I think that's what you're asking.
Yeah.
The answer is we don't really know.
That's right.
Whether they're supernatural or
or
We
not.
I was telling Ed before we hit record, though, you know, a lot of scholars would say, you know, in that context, whoever wrote the book of Exodus, in that culture, supernatural things were not, they were just accepted as truth, no matter what. I mean, from all cultures, everybody at that point believed in the supernatural. And so from his perspective, it really doesn't matter the way he's trying to describe this story, whether is this a supernatural thing against God, or is it a sleight of hand that they were able to mimic? They would just have accepted it as a supernatural act. And so that's the context in which they're writing it.
And I think it's...
I don't know if y'all ever seen Penn and Teller.
I have seen Penn and Teller.
Every time I go to Vegas, I go to Penn and Teller and see them. I've seen them catch a bullet in their mouth. I do not know how that's possible, but I've gone online and watched explanations, but I ain't gonna let nobody shoot a gun in my mouth.
No.
You know, and so it looks like magic. I know it's a trick.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it could be either one. It could be they're just really skilled magicians and they're saying, oh, well, that's all Moses is doing is he's a skilled magician. It could be that there is supernatural beings. You know, the beginning of the book of Exodus, and I think this is important for the conversation. I'm currently leading a group of people in a study on the book of Exodus. The big theme of Exodus is not just because the actual Exodus takes place in the first 7 chapters, and there's a whole bunch of other ones you read. Yeah. The real theme is God keeps saying, I'm going to show my name to not only Egypt and the gods of Egypt, he says, but also to Israel, that they would know my name. Yep. It takes to chapter, I don't remember where we are. It's like chapter 36 or 40, where God finally does tell them his name. He tells the Yahweh part of it earlier, but the part that is the most quoted verse in the Bible, by other writers of the Bible, which is, you know, the Lord, the compassionate God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness. And then there's this part where he says, and it says he'll forgive all wickedness and rebellion and sin, but he doesn't leave the guilty unpunished.
Right.
And he visits the sins to generations upon generations. Well, that's the name he's been wanting to reveal the whole time. So that's the end of Exodus. If you go back to the beginning, there's a part where it says the Pharaoh, the new Pharaoh, who looks, it says he's going to deal shrewdly with the Israelites because they're growing too much. Well, anytime you see the word shrewd in the Bible, it is linked back to the serpent at the beginning who was crafty and shrewd. It's this way of trying to say the Egyptians had given themselves over to the spiritual forces of evil. So to say that that whatever spiritual force might have done some kind of thing to go, we can do it too, and that God is actually even playing a game with them, drawing them out to be like, yeah, you play this, because what we see is the first 3 plagues the magicians can repeat, but then God starts ramping it up, and they go, we can't compete.
Well, and also, if you go back to that staff to snake sign, the staff that becomes a snake in Moses' hand eats the one
that
the magicians come up with, which again is another one-up.
Well, and it's a
Kinda
part
deal.
of, so take that, even that
Yeah.
idea of that it turns into a serpent,
Mhm.
which not just biblically, there seems to be ideas that in most ancient, what we call Near Eastern cultures,
Mhm.
the idea of dragons
Hmm.
or snakes
Mhm.
or those kind of, they're these monsters, these chaos monsters that they seem to all have very similar ideas around. And the Bible picks up because the actual image of the serpent in Genesis is a serpent with legs,
That's right.
which
Like a
kind of
dragon.
looks like a dragon.
Like a
If
dragon.
you look at a dragon, it's got legs, got this, and we know if it's angelic or demonic or whatever, might even have wings. You know, there's this whole part of, there's this picture of there are these spiritual forces at work in the world, which, going back to, regardless of whether that is particularly what happened with the staff or the snake, the idea that there are spiritual forces at work against God is an Orthodox Christian belief going back.
For sure. And it is the part I found that in the early part of my lifetime. Now, I believe that belief is coming back among people who are Christians and non-Christians.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I believe we are more and more becoming a world where people are aware there's stuff going on that's beyond
Yep.
what I can see and know. They may
There's-
not believe God
Yeah.
is, but they believe
Yeah.
stuff's going on.
And I think that's also a result of how much knowledge we have gained
Right.
scientifically
Mhm.
and technologically over the past several decades. People are starting to realize we are understanding so much that we're understanding how much we don't.
That's
understand.
right. That we don't know.
Well, and so
Yeah.
to go back to this, and I
Yeah.
think that's a really good segue into it.
Mhm.
Egypt is the highest empire at the time. They are
Yeah.
That's right.
they are equivalent to America. They are the world power.
Yeah.
They had the height of technology.
Well, there are things they did that we still don't know how,
How
they
they
did.
did it.
People
Yeah.
do not know how they built the pyramid.
No,
Right.
people are like, what's going on? So this is
It was
the,
aliens.
yeah.
That's an explanation, which is real close to saying supernatural.
yes.
It's
It's
very-
another. It's
When you
it's a
start
scientific supernatural.
when you start going to multiverses or
Mhm.
other planets, you just might as well
Might as
say,
well.
"I don't understand this. It's a power greater than we are," which sounds something like a god, maybe.
And so there's a level of hubris to these magicians who
Mhm.
would be the way we, in our world, we wouldn't do the magicians. We'd have, well, let's try and scientifically explain the magic trick. Let's go behind and I can figure out by doing this and we'll put it under a microscope and we'll
Mhm.
figure out how this thing is done. And it's almost as if God is drawing in the hubris of this empire
Yep.
that has decided we can oppress people. Because who's going to stop us? I mean, think about it. 400 years they've oppressed these
Twice as
people.
long as the United States been in existence.
Yes,
That's right.
and there's this, there's this idea of almost the people crying out. And so when God says, "I'm slow to anger," because the way we think about it is like, man, when I do bad things, God must be so angry. But God, He's good to be slow to anger. There's also a part of it that's like, when He gets to but He doesn't leave the guilty unpunished. That's the part that makes all of us scared because we're like, well, I don't want to be left I want to be left unpunished. What He's saying is, I am slow to anger. Because you guys have rebelled against me, because Israel, at the point he says this, has already rebelled against him. They've already done the golden calf and worshiped somebody because I'm slow to anger. But then he also wants to remind, I'll forgive your wickedness. But after 400 years of suffering,
Mhm.
I'm not leaving the guilty unpunished on this, which anyone who has ever lived through the Holocaust,
Mhm.
anyone who ever lived through American slavery or any amount of oppression goes at some point, it's not fair if people just get off scot-free.
Mhm.
That someone who does not want to turn their life around, doesn't want to admit what they did was wrong, doesn't want to issue an apology, doesn't want to say, I'm going to do different, that God just goes, well, whatever, that's all taken care of. There is this feeling of there has to be something done. And in the book of Exodus, what we see is God goes, I'm on the side of the people here who are crying out. And for my name to be revealed, justice must also be done. There will be more mercy than you could stand, but there will also be justice done. And so when you look at this, God's drawing them out to say, I'm going to reveal my name and the world is going to know. And the Exodus becomes, it really is the biggest God event
Mhm.
other than the resurrection. And you could say, as far as fame in the world at the time, the Exodus is a bigger deal than the resurrection. Not in the history of the world and what it means for our salvation and what it means in Jesus. But in the bigness of what happens, that many people leaving, that much plagues being done, the resurrection is only witnessed by 500 people and then eventually is played out. So this becomes this massive way of God revealing who he is.
Well, and I'll say about all of that, about his name and the way he reveals himself. Some of that's contrasting with the gods that people knew in other cultures of. They were quick to punish.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't forgive. There was no mercy. So he's contrasting. The other thing is about these miracles, because we don't often look at, why would God choose things that the magicians could do is under the idea, wouldn't God want to choose something that's undeniable? Well, even when God gives Moses the snake on the mountain and the hand in the cloak that turns to leper, and he still calls Moses still has to say, yeah, but I don't want to go. Would you send Aaron?
Right.
I mean, even after those, so even at that point, he's seen it for himself. He sort of believes, he's sort of committed, but he wants to go, but he wants his brother to go with him. He don't want to go alone. So it is the kindness of God, and this is hard for us to get to, and it's still for people, that God will always leave space for you to not believe if you don't want to believe. And I can remember, I don't know who said it, but a preacher I heard years ago now, I was thinking while you were talking a minute ago, that the Exodus is not only about getting the nation out of Egypt. The 40 years in the wilderness and all the rest of the judges and all that is Egypt's got to get out of them.
Yeah, that's right.
And so he's constantly revealing himself to what we look at later and go, well, gosh, why do they keep going back? But there ain't nobody listening that ain't done the same thing.
That's right.
If you want to doubt, if you want to see what God's doing and you don't want to believe, there's enough space to do that.
Always will be.
Yeah. Well, and they wanted, that ultimately is the issue with Israel, it's the issue with us, it's the issue with the Pharisees, with Jesus, is they wanted God to be who he was. They wanted a God. That's the issue when they bring the golden calf in, is they don't abandon God. It feels to us like they're abandoning God. They don't. They call this Yahweh. They don't say, and here's our new one, this is Moo Moo Cow, and that's who we're worshiping. They say, this is Yahweh. This is the one who brought us out of.
That's what it looks like.
They're going, we want to be able to control and shape who he is and what he's like. And that's why God resists that as strongly as he does, is God goes, you don't get to make me in your image because I already made you in my image. And you have to deal with me for who I am, not who you wish I was and who you want me to be. They wanted God to behave more like the gods of other nations.
And ultimately, it's about trust, and trust is not the same thing as surety. It's never the same. It means I am giving my trust to you, but there is a sense of I just have to trust. I don't have control. I'm releasing control over myself to what seems to make sense to me. It seems you've done all these plagues. It seems to make sense that I should just do what you want me to do. But there's always enough room for me to go, you know what, I'm going to take that back. As we were joking beforehand, even after all the plagues, and they've lost people. People have died from the plague. 2 days later, Pharaoh's like, let's go get them. I haven't really decided to let them go.
It's like he forgot it all.
Yeah, it's just, if you want to not believe, if you think you can do better than God, you will always think you can do better than God. If I can control this situation better than what he's doing, I'll always think that.
And I think, so to do what we talked about earlier and to tie it all, not just to stay in Exodus, if the point of Exodus is to reveal the name of God, what we ultimately know is that they still didn't get it. It took them until Jesus shows up, who is the perfect revelation of who God is. That Jesus is God's name embodied in a person, and the judgment that God has to bring against sin, it's done in Jesus. And we talked about this Sunday in the sermon, that really the ultimate issue then at that point becomes is what do you make of Jesus? And Jesus doesn't come into the world to condemn the world. That God sends Moses as his way to really condemn Egypt and condemn what the gods of Egypt were doing. But when God sends Jesus, he does not send Jesus into the world to condemn the world. It is not his primary part. But anyone, as John says in book, anyone who does not believe, they are already standing condemned.
That's right.
That you have chosen at that point to, and this is not the way we like to see it. I'm siding with Egypt. I'm siding with the serpent in this case. It's not the way we see it, but this is effectively what it is. That Jesus also, when he shows up, goes to war against the spiritual forces. He's driving out demons. He's going to war in the same way Moses did, but in a different way that did not harm humanity, that comes in and is this constant rescuing. But there were even people during that time who choose to say, we're going to just reject what you're up to. And so when you read these, reading them in conjunction with one another helps. That because the Exodus, Jesus is our Passover lamb. That happens at the end of Exodus, God's rescue for us. Jesus is that answer. And so I think for any of us, as we're reading through, don't get lost in these kind of questions. These kind of questions are good, and I don't think there's anything wrong with asking any of them. But Jesus is the answer ultimately to all these questions. And why is God up to this in Exodus? Why is God up to this in Numbers? Why is God up to doing this weird thing I saw over here? The answer is look to Jesus. Jesus is the fulfillment of all of those things. Yep. He doesn't erase all the things that come before. He just fulfills them. He brings them about in a way that you go, oh, that's what all that was pointing to.
They were real blurry, and he just clears it.
Yeah, he brings in a lens around it where you go, oh, that this is what it actually looks like when God goes to war against Satan. Mm-hmm. It's a different deal.
Yep. I hope that helped. We'll find out. Because if you have extra questions, you can just always send them to us. But hope that gives you some context on what you were asking.
I was just thinking about the thing you were saying, and then of God going to war against evil. God does, ultimately in each of our lives, there are things that God continually points out to me. But like the magicians, there are ways that I can try to get whatever good thing God wants me to get.
Yes.
I can make myself believe I've gotten that without doing it God's way. I can decide if I want intimacy, not to do that the way God wants. I got everything good God had for me over here in the restrictive way it looked like to me he did it.
Yes.
I got it this way. But it's just a trick. It's the trick of the evil one. And it ultimately does do damage to me. There's just no way to say that it doesn't.
That's right.
Every time I decide I can control something that God lovingly has told me he would take care of for me if I would just trust him. If I just walk his way and just trust him, I can convince myself I got it. But ultimately, at some point, I will see it did harm to me or to other people or to other things. And God is at war with that.
Yes.
Not because he hates me or the people. He hates what it does to us.
Yes. Yep. That's good.
Good point. That'll preach. So, send us more questions if you've got them. More questions like this, follow-up questions, whatever you like. I think we've got another one on tap that we are about to film here in just a little bit that'll be coming out next week. So, stay tuned for that. We'll see you next time.